In 2009, a man named Daniel Harper walked out of his home and vanished without a trace, leaving behind his phone, his car, and a life that showed no reason to disappear. For 11 years, his family searched for answers that never came, until one night he returned, alive, unchanged in ways that didn't make sense, claiming to remember nothing beyond the moment he stepped outside, as if time had simply erased itself. And before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos, because the real question isn't how he came back, it's where he was all those years. His name was Daniel Harper, a husband, a father, a man whose life followed a rhythm so familiar that no one ever imagined it could simply stop. He worked, he came home, he showed up for his family, and then one night he disappeared without leaving behind a single explanation. No bank activity, no phone signal, no witnesses who could place him anywhere beyond his own front door. Nothing that could point investigators in any direction that made sense, and for years his case remained a question. With no answer until he returned more than a decade later, alive but changed in ways that were difficult to explain, and what he said about those missing years forced investigators to reconsider everything they thought they understood, raising questions that still haven't been resolved. Did Daniel Harper choose to walk away from his life? Was he taken by someone who left no trace behind? Or is there something about his story that doesn't fit into any explanation we're comfortable accepting? Daniel Harper wasn't the kind of man anyone expected to disappear. He had a steady job, a home filled with laughter, and a routine that rarely changed, the kind of life that feels secure simply because it is consistent, and to everyone around him he seemed present, dependable, grounded in the small details that make up everyday life. But over time those closest to him began to notice moments that didn't quite fit. Brief pauses where he seemed distant, as if his attention had slipped somewhere else entirely, conversations he couldn't fully recall, and stretches of time that felt incomplete even to him. At first it was easy to dismiss as stress or exhaustion, something temporary that would pass on its own, but the pattern didn't fade, it deepened. Hours he couldn't account for turned into entire days that didn't line up with reality, and when asked where he had been, Daniel Harper didn't have an answer. Not because he was avoiding the question, but because he genuinely didn't know. On the night Daniel Harper disappeared, everything followed the same quiet pattern his family had come to expect. The house settled into silence, his wife fell asleep, and nothing suggested that this night would be remembered any differently from the ones before it. But sometime around 2:13 in the morning, something shifted. The front door opened slowly, without force, without urgency, and Daniel Harper stepped outside into the darkness with nothing in his hands and no clear reason for leaving. There were no signs of a struggle, no indication that anyone had been there with him, no disturbance inside the home that could explain why he walked away. Just one detail investigators would return to again and again: the door was left unlocked, as if he had expected to come back within moments. But by morning, Daniel Harper was gone, and in the days that followed, what little they did find only made the situation harder to understand, raising questions that didn't lead to answers, only deeper uncertainty. Police launched a full-scale investigation into Daniel Harper's disappearance, searching nearby forests, reviewing hours of security footage, and questioning everyone who had been part of his life, from close friends to co-workers who insisted nothing about him seemed out of place. Yet small details began to surface that only added confusion. A co-worker who claimed Daniel had been acting distant in the weeks before he vanished, financial records that showed no unusual activity, and a phone signal that briefly appeared miles away before going completely silent again, each lead suggesting a different possibility but none strong enough to hold. Theories formed and collapsed just as quickly. Some believed Daniel Harper chose to leave, others believed he was taken, and some feared something worse had happened. But no matter how many angles investigators explored, nothing truly fit together. The case slowly lost momentum as time passed, until 11 years later, when a call came in that would change everything. A man walked into a police station in a different state, exhausted, disoriented, and carrying nothing but the clothes he was wearing, and when he reached the front desk, he said a name that had not been spoken there in over a decade: Daniel Harper. At first the officers assumed it was a mistake, a misunderstanding, maybe even someone seeking attention, but within hours fingerprints confirmed what no one was prepared to accept. The man standing in front of them was Daniel Harper, the same man who had vanished without a trace 11 years earlier, the same man whose case had been closed and filed away as unresolved. and when the news reached his family, shock spread through every part of their lives in an instant, because Daniel Harper was alive. But what unsettled investigators even more than his return was what he claimed had happened during the time he was gone, because according to him, there were no 11 years. There was no journey he could remember, no places he could describe with certainty, only a blank stretch of time that felt like it had never existed at all, and that was when the real questions began. Daniel Harper sat across from investigators and repeated the same explanation again and again, that he had no memory of the past 11 years, that to him it felt like only a few hours had passed between stepping outside his home and finding himself in a place he didn't recognize, and no matter how many times they pressed him for details, his answer never changed, leaving doctors to consider rare psychological conditions that could explain such a gap while others questioned whether Daniel Harper was withholding the truth. And as his story spread, headlines began to clash, some calling it a miracle, others suggesting something far less believable, but even as opinions divided, one detail refused to settle into any clear explanation, because records began to surface placing Daniel Harper's fingerprints in locations during those missing years where, according to everything he claimed and everything investigators could verify, he could not have been, and that single fact continues to stand at the center of a story that no one has been able to fully understand. So what really happened to Daniel Harper during those lost years? Was it a form of trauma that erased time in a way most of us can't comprehend? Was it deception built on something he chose not to reveal? Or is there an explanation that simply doesn't fit within what we understand about memory and reality? Because the truth is, even now, the story of Daniel Harper remains unresolved in the ways that matter most. And the questions surrounding his disappearance continue to challenge anyone who tries to make sense of it. So what do you think happened? And if this story stays with you, there are others that raise even more questions than answers. Subscribe for more real stories that will make you question everything.